How is this audit going to affect the city going forward as far as implementing policies, procedures? How long are these things going to take?
Matt, I thank you for the opportunity to discuss some of the topics. The question you just asked me is probably a book-long answer. I'll try to give you the Reader's Digest answer in a little bit more condensed version. I appreciate the audit, and I appreciate the citizens caring enough about the city to ask for an audit, and I appreciate the state auditor coming down here and taking his time to spend time with us. The audit reflects 2012, which is probably one of the worst years in Bolivar. If we go back in history, the city had been managed by elected officials up until when Ron Mersch became city manager, I believe in 2004, 2005. I'm not exactly sure.
2005, but there was actually a city administrator before that.
Right.
It was, I can't remember the first name. The last name is Helton.
Right, but he was a brief. I think he was brief.
And then there was another one after him
Right.
that was Hancock, and
Right.
then there was a time where there
Right.
was no one.
So in 2011, I was elected, and in January 2012, Ron Mersch resigned, and I was nominated by the alderman to be acting city manager. I don't have the qualifications to do that, and I was well aware of that, and that's why I contacted people both in Columbia and Springfield and throughout the state to help me with the financial problems. It was well aware that the city was in financial distress. We interviewed candidates and brought in our current city manager, Darren Chappell. He started in April of 2012. The audit started, I believe, in August of that year, if I'm correct. And it took a long time to really get done. The year we're looking at is 2012. The city has changed dramatically since then. First of all, the alderman, we have met with the auditor, Donna Christensen, several times, and have reviewed all her suggestions and came up with answers, and our answers are in the audit report. Some of the issues have been totally resolved even before the audit, or at least we're in the process of it.
Can you name some of those issues that have
One of
been
the
resolved?
issues that was resolved is that the city is no longer in financial distress. Last year, I believe we had a surplus of almost $200,000 in our general fund, and I think this year it's well over $300,000. Our credit rating, which is how you borrow money and the way you determine interest and post bonds, when all this happened was a BBB plus, and now it's A minus. And so we're able to borrow money at like 2.5%, which is great if you want to expand things and you want to build a water treatment plant and you want to take over a juvenile detention center. That's what you need. You need to have the borrowing power. And that's what Standard & Poor's, which is not a political organization, tells us that we're financially sound. They don't want to loan money to people who are bad risk. Now, was the city in financial trouble? Absolutely. And I realized that when I became city manager. And that's why I went out and tried to hire somebody that really knew how to run a budget. And I believe Darren Chappell has done a good job with that aspect. Now, are there other issues? Yes, there are procedural issues that have been in place for a long time that need to be corrected. Some of the record keeping, some of the procedures have been a problem. And we are already on top of this. Last night, the Board of Aldermen and myself met with Mr. Chappell, and you were there. We started at 6 and we didn't get done till after 10 o'clock. And we went over every line item and discussed whether it was valid or invalid. Should we spend the money or not spend the money? We want to repay the street fund. That was not our doing. That was a prior administration. Took money from a restricted fund and put it in the general fund. Another problem we have, and we've been working on, is having enough savings in the general to run the city in case of a disaster. For example, Joplin had a tornado, Stockton had a tornado. It's not unforeseen that we couldn't have some kind of disaster like that here. you have to have more than 30 days to run a city, because when you depend on sales tax, like we do, and if we lose our ability to have commerce in the city for 6 months, where are you going to get your sales tax base? So you have to have reserves, and that's one of the things we're trying to do, is build up the reserves. Our goal over the next 3 to 4 years is to have 2.5 million in reserves. Well, if your household is in trouble and you're financially impoverished, you can't make up your debt in one day or 1 month or 1 year. You have to constantly save and work on it. It has to become a process and a habit, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make it a habit for the city to be financially responsible.
In your opinion, based on this audit, how bad off do you think the city is? Scale of 1 to 10.
I think if you look back at 2012, I think we were probably a 2 or 3. We were in bad shape. Are we out of the woods now? No, we're not at 10.
Where would you say we are now?
I would say we're probably a 6, and we're climbing. You know, you don't get out of financial difficulty in 1 year, and it's only been really a year since we've really started turning things around. And unfortunately, we had to go from 95 employees to 73. We had to tighten our budget and spend less money. We had to close the swimming pool this year. Why? Well, we can't. It costs about $400,000 to operate that pool year-round. We can't afford that on top of the debt payment, which is $500,000. It's a lot of money for a recreation event. You know, the things we have to have in the city are the police, the fire, the street, and sewer. And those are the things we have to have for the citizens.
Talking about the transfer of funds in February 2012, you were quoted in the Bolivar Herald-Free Press as saying that the transfer from the street fund was made without our total knowledge. When we looked at the budget back in December, we noticed a $4,000 variance on a $14 million budget. We met 3 days going over it, and the city administrator assured us it was okay. Now, that's two things coming out of that. The city has not had any illegal transfers since. Is this the last illegal transfer that the city's had, to your knowledge? And, I mean, are you going to be able, based on this quote, will you be willing to take responsibility, whatever your share of it is, if it comes back that we find out the city has had another illegal transfer of funds since this time? Because the city now knows that there's, you know, supposedly that's Darren's role in all this, is to say, you can't do this. We can't move money from here to here. So the aldermen have to be able to come in and say, you know, we're trusting you, but you were there. You were there when it happened the last time. You know that it has happened, and how much responsibility would you personally be willing to take if it happened again?
Well, first of all, I don't run the day-to-day operations of the city. And in fact, other than breaking a tie, I really don't have a vote in things. I think I voted once in the 2.5 years that I've been mayor. The transfer of money is done by the clerk under the direction of the city manager. Now, one of the things that we talked about last night as a helpful adjunct to help the aldermen, because the aldermen really are just a bunch of citizens, a bunch of volunteers. I mean, you look at the people we have, and we have an electrician, we have a retired management person, we have a retired contractor, we have a retired school teacher, we have a cardiologist as a mayor. We're not accountants, okay? But I've gotten better, and I think everybody's gotten better. One of the things we're going to do is we are going to hire an accountant to check the books at least every quarter to see what is done. And you need to do that, because the audit talks about separation of power between those who collect and those who pay. I think there's also, we need all the people on the Board of Aldermen and myself feel like we're handicapped because we're not there on the day-to-day operations, and we don't always see what is going on as far as the budget. You know, when you make, it's like statistics. You know, you can work statistics for a certain period of time, but eventually they're going to catch up with you. And it's the same way with borrowing money, and it's the same way with moving money. It eventually caught up with the prior administration that money was being taken from a restricted fund to a general fund. I don't want that ever to happen again, and I've told Darren, and I don't think that has happened under his administration and my administration, and I don't think it ever will. But I will take responsibility for that, and I will take responsibility for any of the problems that we have currently and from now on, and some of the ones in the past. But we've been, you know, you deal with the problems as fast as you can, and we're trying to make this a more financially solvent city. We're trying to improve the environment, improve the parks, the ordinances. We're trying to make it a more livable city for everybody.
In this article from last year, you talk about the city the city alderman had 3 days to look over the budget. There's been one meeting, one open meeting to look over the budget this year for 2014. What assurances can you give people that these same mistakes won't happen with a third as many meetings being used to review the budget by the alderman?
Well, I think if you look at the article, it says, Mayor says Bolivar must cut more spending. And that was in
February 2012.
February of 2012.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I think I was right on. And we have had the budget now for a couple weeks. Darren prepared 2 different forms for us to look at, and we discussed it briefly. We have talked, we've all looked at it ourselves. We had a 4-hour meeting last night. We'll have another meeting Tuesday. The budget process that we're going through is a little different than the one we had in 2012. This is a bare necessities budget. It is, we're going to have firemen. How much are we going to pay them? We're going to have policemen. How much are we going to pay them? We're not talking about projects. The projects will be approved next year as we go forward on a case-by-case or ordinance-by-ordinance process. We will look and see if we have the money, and then if we have the money, we will pass the ordinance to do the project and then proceed with the project. That's the way you do it. You don't, you start with the basics like we are, and then expand as money becomes available.
Going back to the audit, there are a number of issues here related to the city clerk's duties. Under accounting records and procedures, which is all about the city's money, it says the city clerk's accounting records contained inaccuracies and many journal entries are posted without independent review or posted several months after the accounting period ends. How did it get to a point where those records were months behind?
I'm not the city clerk,
I understand.
and so I can't ask what. I do think that there have been a lot of challenges at the city, such as, you know, having to lay off 13 people or fire 13 people, whatever you want, or 11. I think not having a city hall and having to move to various locations has been a problem with the mold. I think the transition to a new city manager, I think those are all problems.
But this audit is about 2012 is the year, and that predates having to move out of City Hall.
You're correct. Specifically, I think you'd have to ask. I really am not going to talk about any particular individual other than I will talk about Mr. Chappell, who is my direct responsibility. We have a city clerk right now that has 16 years experience, and I think she has a good grasp on what is going on.